I'm Winston Goodfellow, award-winning writer, photographer, and automotive archaeologist. I'm here in the heart of Silicon Valley in one of my favorite hidden photo locations. And for the past several days, we've been touring the area in this car, a Ferrari F12. What brought us here is a unique story that's going to make this episode a little different. This car was owned by a good friend of mine, and so we're going to take a look at relationships, growing up, and we're going to interweave my relationship with Carl, Silicon Valley, and Ferrari and Pininfarina in an episode I call Carl, the Black Car, and Life Lessons Learned. Let's go digging. All right, everyone. This is a slightly bittersweet experience. I'm sitting here going up an old road that used to be from my childhood. That's just a fantastic drive. And I'm in this lovely Ferrari F12. But the bittersweet part of this is, this was owned by one of my dearest friends who passed away unexpectedly. And this was his car, and so I've been helping his widow determine what she wants to do with the car. She decided to sell it. And so we're gonna put it in the Gooding auction at Monterey in 6 days. And so as kind of a eulogy to Carl, my friend, we decided to do this video as well as dive into a lot of Ferrari history that the F12 represents. It's kind of the tail end of the Pininfarina-Ferrari relationship. But what makes this bittersweet is, I wish Carl was here, just because we go back so long to 4th grade, just so I could hear, okay, when you bought it, what were you thinking? Because it was the first exotic car he bought. He put deposits on a number of things and then didn't do it. Anyhow, and so it's very interesting because it's a lovely piece, as we will see. But it's just the emotion of where I wish my friend was here sitting next to me so that we could dial into it, because he was with me in one of my great experiences in my Daytona. Oh my God, that was fun. And so just to be able to share the moment with him as I'm driving this. We're now driving along Honda Road, which was one of my favorite stretches of tarmac back in the day. There was nothing out here. And what makes this moment so special for me is many years ago I had a Daytona. And so Carl and I were out for a drive. And there was a guy ahead of us in a motorcycle. And so he saw this silver Ferrari coming up on him. And so let's just say we started dicing. And it was a friggin' blast. And so Carl he never got into cars. I mean, he was into cars, but he didn't drive them like I did. And so he was kind of timid for whatever reason. And so we were going through some of these lovely turns like this with this motorcycle ahead of us. And pretty soon we're doing 100, 105, 110. And I'm whipping through these turns. And Carl was sitting next to me. And he's going, oh my God, this is fantastic. Holy shit, we're gonna die. Oh my God, this is fantastic. We're gonna crash. And he was just going back and forth like that, from utter elation to utter terror. Just bang, bang, bang. I grew up in California back when California was really California. And today, you would say the area I grew up in was called Silicon Valley, right around Stanford University on the San Francisco Peninsula. But back then, we didn't call it that at all. Silicon Valley didn't exist when I was starting to grow up. The term came into being in 1971. Back then, we called it the San Francisco Bay Area. That was it. We lived in an area called Menlo Park, which wasn't anything like it is today. Now that's the real heart of Silicon Valley, a lot of money there. It's really kind of ritzy. Back then it was just a middle-class neighborhood. And so there we were, and when I was in fourth grade, the Schmidts moved in next door. And so Carl and I became steadfast friends almost immediately because we shared a number of the same interests, sports and cars. And then there was a television show called Speed Racer. How could we not watch that? That type of stuff. And so we really palled around, riding our bicycles, all sorts of fun. As we came of age, so did Silicon Valley. It was originally an agricultural area, and then technology came in post-war. A lot of that through the association with Stanford University. Not realizing it at the time, it was really an area of large personalities. So for instance, just a name that everyone recognizes now is Steve Jobs. He wasn't the only one. Well, Modena, where Ferrari was from, and even we could say Italy, all of Italy, their exotic car industry, they had their large personalities too. For instance, Enzo Ferrari, real natural. And through the osmosis and who was working with whom, both in Silicon Valley and over in Modena and Italy, real tight friendships formed. For instance, back here behind my desk is a photo of Enzo Ferrari, and then there's another one with Sergio Scaglietti, one of Ferrari's top coach builders. They were steadfast friends through their lives. Sergio Pininfarina ended up becoming a great friend with Enzo Ferrari. Back in Silicon Valley, you had Bill Hewlett and David Packard, the original partners in Hewlett-Packard. And so there were a lot of commonalities between Silicon Valley and Modena and the exotic car industry in Italy that I can see today. As Carl and I grew up, Pininfarina and Ferrari were going through real ascension. They became, Ferrari was the performance leader of the world. They were winning endurance titles, they were winning F1 championships, but they also led the world in design thanks to Pininfarina. They were the masters of elegance. And so, as kids, we kind of recognized that but couldn't enunciate it like I just did. And so Ferrari Pininfarina really captivated our hearts. And this continued throughout our lives. And as we grew older, it's interesting because looking back, his family was car people, we were car people. His old man had an Alfa Romeo Spider Veloce. He ended up enjoying steam cars, Carl's father. That kind of osmosisized over to Carl, where he had a Triumph TR4A. He might have even had an MG. He also went through a number of Porsches. And I was different. I started out with a Mercedes, then there were ESOs and some other things and Ferraris, and I also had some Mustangs and stuff, because back then, things were friggin' cheap. I mean, you could buy so much interesting stuff and it didn't cost so much. But you have to remember, this was different than today. Back then, the cheapest thing around was last year's race car because nobody wanted it. And so that spilled over into road cars. It was the same thing. As we grew older and I transitioned into the auto industry, Carl started living vicariously through me. And then in college, we kind of went our separate ways and then came on back at the end of it, where we both ended up at UC Berkeley. We both ended up on the Monterey Peninsula. During this time, Carl ended up buying some Apple stock. How coincidental, some guy from Silicon Valley ends up buying Apple stock. Where Carl was great was he was one of these diehard Apple guys. There was no effing way he was selling for anything. Lo and behold, went up, split, went up, split, went up, split, went up, split, however many times. Then a lovely gal, Ann McCann, came into his life. They ended up getting married. And then he ended up moving back up to Washington State, where his parents were originally from. He, through this period, he liked to imbibe. And we would kind of joke about it sometimes. But there were other times where it went a little too far. And I would have to call him on it, dude, that wasn't cool. Anyhow, and so when he went back up to Washington, there were sometimes I could see it, sometimes I couldn't when we were talking over the phone. But he started to change this little bit. Still the same old dear guy, but I could tell, let's just say I could tell when he was happy. But our relationship remained tight. Yeah, we had a few hiccups here and there. The relationship remained tight. And then there was this one time where we were talking on the phone and I was telling him about my desire to do a YouTube channel or something along those lines. I really wanted to go into that. And it was just this lovely conversation. And so we're brainstorming and going crazy. And then he, boom, just totally out of left field, he said, you know what? Let me back you. And I said, well, what do you mean? And so he just said, let me send you some money. I said, no, you don't need to do that. He was quite insistent on doing it even when I was refusing. And I finally relented. He was a lovely friend. This is what made Carl so special. But then here's where the problem came in. And this was a real difficult episode in both of our lives, where 2 days later, he sent me an email and said, I'm rescinding my offer. I was drunk when I made it. The problem was, and this was a real issue for me, was the fact that he rescinded his offer. That's fine. You can do that. You made it something out of generosity. If you want to pull back, I totally get it. But the problem was, in our conversation, more than once, 2 or 3 times, I asked him, are you drunk? He said, no, I'm not. And so when he sent me the email that said he was drunk, I went friggin' ballistic because that crossed the line. You don't lie. And he had lied. He didn't mean to do it, but of course he had lied. Oh God, I don't know, maybe for a year, we didn't talk. We corresponded by email, but it was kind of superficial. Yeah, we didn't talk for probably a year. But then, through the process, my heart healed. And it was, and so we started going back to normal in email correspondence and such, but I never expressed to him that he had been forgiven. And so then one day, totally out of the blue, he called me in tears and said, can you ever forgive me? I'm so sorry for what I did. And I said, well, friend, you were forgiven a while ago. We're back to normal. It's all good. And bang, we went back to normal. And it was fantastic.
So we're trundling up to the top of a skyline, just puttering along in the F12. And it's actually pretty good as just a car. I've got it in an automatic, which is probably blasphemous to some of you. Going 27 miles an hour in 4th gear, very un-Ferrari-like. But I love the steering on this because you have nice sharp turn in, and there's lots of tight turns on this. It's nicely weighted, decent feel, good resistance. Love the feel of the steering wheel itself. You have a couple small hooks for your thumbs, which is nice. So let's take her out of auto, get her into manual, drop her down a couple gears. Backside of the paddles feel lovely. They're nicely curved, which is, in the early days, 355. Paddles didn't feel like this. And so it's just been nice the way textures and curvature and that type of stuff has come into it. Certainly doesn't equal a manual transmission in terms of tactile feel and getting you involved in the driving experience, but it's still much better than, like I said in the early days, where it was like a plastic paddle, and then they put some Alcantara on the back to make it a little better. They played with the resistance a little bit, so there is kind of a feel to it. Good crisp turn in, as we were saying. The ride is slightly harsh, but not overly so. But just so we can feel a little bit. This thing just wants to run. It's one of my old tricks that we used to do in the day, is you would back it off. I used to do this on the freeways too. Now freeways are so crowded, even this gets hard. But it's just you let the traffic go a bit ahead, so at least you can feel something of what the car does. And so we've got a little bit of space now, so we'll get on her just a little bit. Brake pedal, good feel. Very minimal travel. I like the way it bites. I'm not stomping on it super hard. And the way she turns in and just flows through these turns is absolutely lovely. And of course, you've got that amazing sound of 1,000 bees following you very closely, wailing out of the exhaust behind you. I'm surprised that I don't hear the engine in this like I would hear in a 599 a Daytona, 275, 250 short wheelbase, any of the old Ferraris. But it's still, in terms of the oral experience, this is pretty impressive. And there's just, the V8s are nice, but they have kind of more of a shriek to it. V12s are kind of beefier and to me have more depth and fluidity to them. It's a beautiful concert. And there's some times where you just want to be quiet and let the Ferrari do its thing. Back in the day, I had a loop that I used to do where we'd come down the Honda Road and then I'd shoot down this. We're on Highway 1 right now, and I'd go down to Santa Cruz. And this is late 70s, early 80s. There was no one on this. I'd go down to Santa Cruz, which is about 40 miles to the south, at 100 miles an hour the entire way, and 100 miles an hour coming back the entire way. I'd see maybe 2 to 3 cars in the entire drive. And you can see now with our GoPros how many we're picking up coming each way. Wasn't that way in the day. Carl used to join me on that trip occasionally. And it was just the most brilliant thing. What do you feel like doing? Let's go do the drive. We'd come up La Honda, come whipping down, shoot down to Santa Cruz, 100 miles an hour, come back up, take Pescadero Road back up to the top, just sit up top looking over the Bay Area, watch the sun go down, watch the lights come on. I did that with my ESOs, I did that with my Ferrari. My Ferraris, Carl was often accompanying me, and it just buds talking, looking at stuff, talking life. It was wonderful. And that's, everything out here was empty. There was nothing, no homes, no anything. I kind of miss that, but it's still, I feel blessed that here I am, my friend's car, the route we used to drive on a beautiful day. Thank you for the memories and the experience I'm having right now. First time in an F12, just totally enjoying this car. I could totally buy one of these. This is so much in the flavor of Ferrari Gran Turismos. Interestingly enough, Carl and I both ended up on the Monterey Peninsula. And he was just this wonderful, smart, intelligent guy with a wicked sense of humor and a real heart of gold. For instance, there was one time where he was at a party and everyone was having a great time, and some kid was kind of floundering in a pool. The only person that noticed it was Carl. He set down his drink, immediately jumped in the pool, fully clothed, pulled the kid out. Thankfully, there was no real problems with the child. On a more personal note, to show what kind of guy he was, back in the day, and this is something I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, I was into my credit cards a lot more deep than I should have been. I should have been smarter. Anyhow, and I was talking to Carl about this, and I had minimal in my checking account, minimal in my savings. I mean, I was literally about one paycheck from going under. And I was telling this to Carl, and I described it this way. I just said, dude, it's the most awful feeling because you feel like you're skating on ice, and there's this crack behind you. And no matter where you go, the crack is following you. And so sometimes it's a foot behind you, other times it's maybe 10 feet behind you, but the friggin' thing is always there. And by this time, he had married this delightful gal, Ann McCann, and then they had moved on up to Washington where a bunch of Carl's family was. And so 2-3 days later, bang, in comes this FedEx letter from Carl. And so I thought, oh my God, look at this. My bud's sending me, a hey dude, hang in there, you'll make it type of note. So I opened the thing up. There wasn't any like sympathy card or whatever in there. Instead, there was this. And here I am, 18 years later, and I still have this. And so I open this thing up, and boom, out comes a check. And he wrote, "Dear Winston, this check is a long-term, no-interest loan. The terms are, if you come into a windfall, you pay me back. Number two, if I come into a windfall, I will forgive the loan. Number three, if I go bankrupt, we'll reassess the terms of this loan. If you agree to these terms, cast the check and keep this letter in your files. I hope this takes the twist out of your gut." That's the type of dude Carl was. I sat on that check for 48 hours, and it was not an inconsequential sum. And then I cashed it. And I called him up and I said, "But thank you so much for your generosity, because it was really appreciated." And he said, "I'm so thankful and so happy you cashed the check," because he said, "I debated on it for about 24 hours, and then I sent it, and when I woke up the next morning, I was so happy that I had." That's the type of guy Carl was. Several months after our reconcile, I got a phone call from Ann that came totally out of the blue, where she just said, "Carl passed away last night." When Ann gave me the news, I was stunned. And there was part of me that had that real surprise, but there was part of me that also wasn't. I had an inkling of how much he drank, and I think his body just gave out. And Ann and I had the most lovely, heartfelt conversation for probably an hour, just kind of as we were both processing everything. And in the course of that conversation, if memory serves me correctly, I told Ann, "I'm so thankful Carl called, because if he had passed away and we hadn't reconciled, I would have been devastated." And so several months after that, at his memorial service, Ann asked me to speak, which I did. And so after going through our life and all the great stories and history that we had together, yes, I touched on our ups and downs. But then I also said at the end of it, time and forgiveness are the greatest healers. And it was something that I knew, but there I was practicing it real life. And so time and forgiveness are the greatest healers. Don't hold on to things forever. Learn to forgive. Sometimes it can be difficult. Actually, a lot of times it can be difficult. But learn to forgive. Because don't carry it with you. Because there can come the time when it'll be too late to let someone know they have been forgiven. And when you do forgive, it's an amazing weight off your shoulders. It makes so much lightness and effervescence come into you in your spirit and your body. And that's what I was feeling while driving the F-12, was just that lovely lightness and the connection with my old friend. And so if you get only one thing out of this video, it is time and forgiveness are the greatest healers. Don't take it with you forever. Don't hold it in forever. And Carl, thank you so much for everything you taught me. And I had the most beautiful day with you in your car. Thank you.